part of the atmosphere. You have to be an element like that. The way I discovered this was I had a young man who wanted to go back to the very first life he had ever lived on Earth. And naturally, I thought it was going to be a caveman or something like that, something primitive. This story is told in my book, Legacy from the Stars. And I naturally thought it was going to be that kind of a life, a primitive lifetime. But he went back to the time when the Earth was still forming. It did not have life on it yet. There was volcanoes erupting. There was no vegetation. The air was poisonous. It had ammonia in it. There was no way any kind of life, plant life or humans or animal, could possibly have evolved at that time because the Earth was still cooling down. The atmosphere was not right yet for people to even think about humans or animals living in that kind of gases. So his job, along with many others, was to be part of the air. And his job was to clean the chemicals from the air, especially ammonia, to gradually bring the Earth to the point where life could exist on it. And that seems hard to understand, but even in a gaseous form where he's communicating with me, he still had a personality. He still was, I don't want to say human, but what I mean is he had a personality. He was able to talk to me and tell me what it was like. And when he wasn't screening the atmosphere to clean out the chemicals so that it could begin to, the gases would stabilize so that life could form, when he wasn't doing that, he was going in and out of the lava that was coming out of the volcanoes and having a wonderful time experiencing the lava and the heat and everything. So it was an exciting life for him anyway. So this could have gone on for eons of time. Can you imagine when people say, well, what time periods were these? It's impossible to put a date on this. The scientists know somewhere back there when the Earth was forming and it was still hot and it didn't have life on it, but it's so many billions and billions of years back, it's just about impossible to put any kind of a date on it. So it was way out of our time frame anyway. So you can imagine how many eons of time this personality would have been there on this job he was assigned to clean the air. Then eventually, the air and the Earth began to calm down, began to cool down to where plants began to form. And it was the very first of life to appear. And in that story, he talked about how he saw the first life of plants forming, and he wanted to go and experience what those were like. And then it talked about the first life forms in the water. So as I worked with him, he went through all the different steps till he finally became what you would consider to be a human, although it was more animalistic. As he said, his teeth didn't work right, and he didn't know how to talk. He was more or less making grunting noises. These were the first life forms that were beginning to come to Earth. But he did experience this first life as gas, as air, as part of the atmosphere. And what's so strange about that, really? Because each life, even something like that, was a learning process. It was to learn something. I've also had two people now in the last year. This is all, a lot of this material is going to go in the new book that I'm working on, Book 3, Convoluted Universe, Book 3. I've had two people went back to where they were part of the ocean. They were part of the water. And there was no land at that time. It was just water encompassing the entire Earth. And they talked about what it was like to be water, to be so big They said you can't imagine how big the ocean is, how big the water is. They were part of this. There was no limitations. It was extremely beautiful. So those were several cases where people were elements, I guess you would say. It's hard to say if they were a chemical or if they were an element or what, but they are the very basic form of life on the planet. After you have experienced the gaseous life, then the next thing you have to do is be rock, dirt. You have to know what that is like. Some of these concepts may be difficult for some people to understand, but everything is alive. Even a rock is alive. It just vibrates at a slower, a deeper frequency. Everything is energy. Everything is alive. It's all vibrating at different vibrations and different frequencies. Therefore, a human being is vibrating at a different frequency than a rock or a table or a tree. That's why they said, if it wasn't vibrating at this different frequency, you could put your hand right through a table, right through a wall. If you knew the frequencies it was vibrating at, it would be possible to do that. It becomes dense and hard to us because it is vibrating at a different frequency. So I have had people go back to where they were a rock. And they said it was very slow. Everything seemed to be slowed down and taking such a long time. But that was what it was like to be a rock. It's up to you. What do you think these people learned? We all went through this. What do you learn from being a rock? I think in these lifetimes they probably wouldn't have been there too long before they moved on to the next stage. But after being rock, then you have to be plant. You have to know, what is it like to be a rose? What's it like to be an ear of corn? What is it like to be a blade of grass? I've people experience these lives, and it is very amazing to hear their descriptions. The one that went back to where he was an ear of corn said it was very nice to just stand there in the wind and have the breeze blowing around him and moving in the wind, and it was very nice and very peaceful. Of course, he's not thinking ahead to the time when he would be picked and probably eaten, because by that time his life would have been over anyway. It was just a very short life. And here again, he would change suits of clothes, he would change costumes. But he described what it was like to be an ear of corn. Then another one described what it was like to be a flower. It was a very beautiful experience to feel the petals and the green around them. It was another beautiful experience to be a plant. But then after that, many of them became animals. And this seemed to be the next logical progression. Next thing you would be an animal. What would it be like to be a bird and fly through the air with complete freedom? What would it be like to be a wolf and be able to run? All of these lives, we're learning something from it. And I've had the most amazing lives of people who have been different animals. And I've seen their perspective. It's something you wouldn't even think about. One that I thought was very fascinating that I've had in the last year was someone to a lifetime as an eagle. And she was sitting on the nest, which was way on the edge of the nest, way up in the mountains on a cliff, looking out over the valley floor. And she had a chick that had just hatched out, it wasn't very old, in the nest behind her. And she was looking out over the valley floor of a desert-like area, just looking for any sign of food. And she said her eyesight was so keen she could pick up any movement from high up on this cliff. She could pick up the tiniest movement of a rabbit or anything on the valley floor. Their sight was that keen. Now, what was interesting was, as she looked along the horizon, the mountains, the scenery, it would look pretty much the way we see things. But if a movement would catch her eye on the floor of the valley, suddenly it would become red. Everything would look red, and she could zero in on movement very quickly. And I'm kind of wondering if this is like some of the scientists perceive infra-red. I don't know. How do we really know what a bird sees? A scientist can dissect it, but how do they really know what it sees as it looks at something? Well, she saw a rabbit running across the valley floor. Everything took on a reddish hue, but she wasn't interested in flying down and getting the rabbit because she said her chick wasn't making any sound, so she knew it wasn't hungry. So she ignored it and let it go. But they wanted to know, if it looked like that during the day, what does it look like at night when they're looking out? We hear about birds, owls, different night birds being able to see in the dark. What do they perceive it? And she said, if it's night and she's looking for something, everything would take on a greenish hue, and she would be able to see the heat given off by anything that was alive and moving. This, to me, was startling. This sounds just like these night goggles that the soldiers wear. When you look through them, everything takes on a greenish hue, and you can see the heat that bodies are giving off. This is exactly what this eagle was picking up. And I thought it was fascinating, because to me, it's not just, I had a life as a bird. I want to know, what does that bird, what does that animal experience? How are they perceiving things? Of course, that's my insatiable curiosity. I always want to know everything about everything, and I ask so many questions. But I had someone else who was a spider. Now, first you would think later when she woke up, it was like, I was a spider? What in the world? It doesn't sound very good. But he described how a spider could see. Now, if you really looked at spiders, in the science books, they have many eyes. And as she looks through these many eyes, she said they don't look through all of them at the same time. It's like looking through a lot of TV sets, and you focus on the TV set that you want to look through, and you're able to have a full range of motion of eyesight that way. Not quite 180 degrees, maybe 90 degrees, but you're able to focus on one part of the whole picture, to focus in on one of those eyes to see what's out there. Not at all what we would think, and I don't know if the scientists have even figured this out, but that would be the way that the spider could see and detect movement. Because he detects movement, it would be out of one of these little TV cameras, maybe way down on the left-hand side of one of these eyes that they're looking through. But it was also explained to me the same thing